Great, thank you. Hi, I'm Natasha. I'm a compulsive eater. Hello. I live in Hertfordshire. I attend a variety of groups. I serve in Region 9, and did in South and East England Intergroup. I don't know what else. I've been in recovery in this part of my recovery for just over 14 years. Um, I think that's enough of a background. You don't really want to know that much about the personal me. Um, I came into 12-step recovery soon after my 21st birthday. It took what it took to get me there. Definitely enough painful experiences. And my kind of eating disorder recovery began before then. Um, I was, in general, an over-exerciser, under-eater, with times where I ate more than I would have rather eaten, but in hindsight, it looks very close to what normal portions look like. But in my brain, it was still compulsive because it was beyond what felt healthy for me at the time. It's tricky for me to explain now. It feels like a lifetime away. Um, and I very much hated every part of my being when I came into recovery. I say that it makes me sad to think of, but it doesn't make me as sad as some other days. I don't feel connected to that part of me anymore. Not because I've cut off from her. She's still a part of me. All versions of myself brought me to where I am. But simply, I'm mean to myself in the ways I used to be. And that helps a lot. Um, I chose the topic hope and connection. It was the strongest thing that came to me when I was asked to choose a topic. And that is because I have very much learnt that insofar as I am being honest, there is hope. Insofar as I keep showing up, there is hope. And when I show up, I can connect in whichever ways work for me that day. Um, there are times when I don't feel like I want to be hugged. That's very, very, very rare. I like a good hug. But equally, for me, connection is very much to do with being able to be present today in a way that I was too scared to be before. Um, and by being present, I mean really looking at my truth honestly, and also being able to hold space for other people's, but with the caveat that I get to cloak myself in almost like a comfortable protective shield as well. It's not my job to carry other human beings. I can carry the message, I can carry my message, I can share love, I can hold space, but I'm never asked to rescue humans. Connection isn't rescuing. Um, yeah, and the other reason I chose that topic is just, as long as I'm connecting with the solution in whatever language works for me, in whatever form works for me today. It's a combination of 12-step meetings, um, doing inventory trains, two-way prayer, which is writing to my higher power for those humans that haven't got to two-way prayer. That's okay. Um, uh, Lots of different ways, and changing the language that I read in literature to work for me. And no, I do not read it out loud or say that this is the official language of OA. But if I need to change language in order for it to be sufficiently loving in line with what my program looks like, that's important for me to do. If it keeps me here and keeps me carrying the message, not my message, and parts of my message, then it's important for me to do that without shame. It's okay for me to not always be comfortable with thous and thys and things like that. And I did I did something early on and I changed all the he's to she's in the big book. Not telling you to do that, but I needed to do that to connect more deeply with my higher power. Because if I have to gender them, it's she today for me. Just because I needed that fierce gentleness that I'm not going to get into gender stereotyping at all. It's simply my identification. Um, and yeah, I still go to therapy. Um, and art is a very big part of my recovery. connecting with that sense of playfulness, allowing myself to show up in those spaces exactly as I am. I don't necessarily create art for the benefit of others. And I very much came into recovery thinking that I wouldn't necessarily be able to get well in this space. I was really glad that you had a higher power. I was so happy for you, as in people in recovery, and I was scared that I wouldn't find one that was strong enough for me, or I wouldn't have a strong enough connection, or why would they want to help me? And actually, it was through simply connecting with the love in the rooms that I started to be able to cultivate that of my own. It was through connecting with messages of hope. Sorry, one second. Messages of hope. And weirdly enough, I garnered a massive amount of hope from humans that had come in and gone out and come back in and gone out and yet come back in again. Because it really helped me to recognize that it didn't matter where I was in my recovery, I was always welcome. I was always going to be accepted here. And that was really, really important for me to know. And for me, thankfully, it hasn't been a matter of going out and coming back in lots of times. However, my recovery has changed along the way, and what my recovery looks like has changed along the way. And there are times that I felt like I was failing because I wasn't sticking to my food plan perfectly enough or doing the suggestions perfectly enough. And actually, I had to recognize, insofar as I was doing my very best, I was doing enough. As long as I was honestly doing the best that I could with what I had to give to my recovery, I was doing enough. And a part of that for me has also been, owning it when I'm struggling with my sponsor and owning it in meetings, and mainly carrying the message of hope and recovery and all of those things into meetings, but also recognizing that I'm allowed to be real and not have to wear my mask in the same kind of fixed way as I used to, in order to still be loved in these spaces just as I am. Because speaking my truth and hearing other people speak their truth reminded me that there's permission in these spaces to share that. I don't necessarily believe that it's, through weakness, not strength, that I'm bound to you all. Sorry. I believe that that I wasn't a weak person. I was a human being that used my willpower in a way that wasn't necessarily loving or helpful to me. That's the best way I can describe it. And actually, strangely enough, I see it as I don't have language to replace the weakness in that. It's simply to do with simple acts of courage. And they might be simply showing our faces on camera on a day that we didn't feel like being present in that way. Or reaching out to someone even when we're having a tricky day, that kind of thing. Those small little steps of courage and bravery to keep showing up. And that's okay if you don't identify with my interpretation that works for me today. Every breath is a new chance for me to choose differently. I have choices today insofar as I keep showing up. I sometimes don't make the right or perfect choices. That's okay. But as long as I consistently try to use my willpower well, that's okay. I was reminded the other day that my higher power very much knows where I'm going. I just need to keep using this program of action and trusting. And some things are scary to me. Where I'm respiratory health has been quite tricky. I've had allergic reactions that I don't have control of with the usual methods. But I've recruited my team, and then I'm trusting the process. But for me, it's when I get stuck to keep borrowing the love. And if I forget what that looks like, ask for help. If I don't know what the next right thing looks like, ask for help. And I remember being told a lot when I first came in, don't quit before the miracle happens. Don't leave before the miracle happens. And strangely enough, that allowed me to realize that it doesn't matter what my relationship with any version of a higher power is. That's not the most important part. The most important part was to keep showing up even if I didn't have a definition yet, to keep showing up even if I didn't have conscious knowledge of the answers that I needed yet. And I was always told, especially when taking inventory and doing my step work, the right things will come up for me at the right time. I can revisit step work when I need to. My first step 4, my first step 1, whatever it is, doesn't need to be perfect. It needs to be enough for now. And I can come back, I'm not failing to come back. I very much had to redefine, in a way, the wording of the steps just to simplify them for my mind, not to dilute them in any way, but to recognize that if I don't connect with the notion of step 1, in that something isn't quite right when I behave in ways that are unkind to myself, if I don't allow myself to connect with that, I get a bit stuck, or should I say unstuck. In step 2, I'm invited to look at the idea that something might be able to help me. For me, the thing that I referred to as my higher power earlier, I don't use the word thing in a reductive or offensive way, is the good in me that tries my best to connect with the good in you. It's the part of me that shows up for service even when I don't feel perfectly well. I've had a very, very long day, but it's an absolute privilege to be able to be here with you and to share and to come just as I am. It's the thing that makes the flowers grow and the sun rise and all of those things. And it's whatever the thing is that reminds me, even when I am in physical pain or afraid because I can't catch my breath because of severe asthma and uncontrolled inflammation, it's that thing that reminds me to dare to believe that it could be better. And it's that force that I believe that has kept me alive. It's that grain of knowledge and that thing that's ingrained within me that chooses to believe it's okay to not be okay at the moment, and to trust that as long as I keep doing the next right thing to the best of my ability, it doesn't have to look right to anybody else, that I will eventually be a bit more okay. And in saying, sometimes when I'm really not okay, I just have to acknowledge and say out loud, I name the feeling, and then I also do say, it's okay. We're okay. We're okay enough. And that's the way that I connect, I suppose, with my inner child that gets terrified.com about life. It took me a really long time to find my feet with what abstinence needed to look like for me. And actually, I'm really grateful that I kept on talking about it, and I didn't get scared of talking about what the food looked like for me and the exercise behaviors and the thoughts that came with eating. I'm really glad that I kept that willingness and the desire to be honest and open. And weirdly enough, I don't talk about this as often anymore, but I joke about having found a way to put my people pleasing to good use, but people pleasing with good boundaries. And that was simply, I had this thing within me when I first came into recovery that, the more well I allow myself to get, hint the word allow, it's a choice. I choose to show up today. I get to, not I have to or I must, I get to. It was very much this feeling of, oh no, I've entirely lost my train of thought. Uh-oh, that's okay. Maybe this thought wasn't for this moment. It'll come back if it needs to. I'm going to trust that and not get derailed by myself. But weirdly enough, it brings me back to step 3. I allow my higher power into my world. It's both a force within me and outside of me. My higher power can be the most sparkly, magnificent, gorgeous creation, and it's still up to me to turn towards that. I talk about it as turning towards the light or that source of love. It's up to me. And in step 4, I get to look at what's keeping me stuck. And I kind of smile at this, but my definition of step 5 is I get to share what's keeping me stuck. And It's a bit like I get to carry it together with my higher power and with hopefully a sponsor or a closed mouth, trusted set of humans. I get to hold it together and unpack. I don't have to carry it anymore. I'm not telling anyone else that they have to carry it either. But I get to say, hey, this is what it looks like. Oh, okay. 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 Um, I don't have to love it. I don't have to love the process. I just need to do it to the best of my ability. And if I don't want to do it, I pray for the willingness to be willing, to be willing, to be willing. Um, have as many layers of that as you need. Or should I, you being me, I'm not talking to you, sorry. I'm not meant to tell anyone else what they should be doing, ever. In step 6, very much it leads on from step 5, I get to look at the parts of me that have possibly become a little bit distorted in order to keep me safe. I experienced a lot of trauma at different stages of my life. And trauma is the thing that underpins my need to be in recovery. And by that, I mean, I used on my feelings by restricting, over exercising, whatever it was. I took up shopping for a while, whatever it was, to fill that gap that was created when I became disconnected from myself because the reality felt too big for me to be with. And in recovery, I get to kind of almost like when you have grout that isn't quite right anymore, I get to kind of chisel away at it and then kind of replace it with other grout. And did you know you can get sparkly grout? I only found this out recently. But I get to replace it with good, whatever the good is. Sorry if grout isn't good. It's really good. It keeps my tiles very happy. Like, it's a good thing. Um, Um, and then in step 7, I get to look at restoring the balance. I ask for balance to be restored. I don't ask for parts of me to be removed. I'm sorry if that's offensive to anybody. I'm going to stop apologizing now. Please take what you like. Please leave absolutely all of the rest and everything if you need. But I ask for balance to be restored so that I don't carry, that my stubbornness can instead become fierce determination, but determination that serves me. Instead of being rule based to keep myself safe all of the time, I can become a bit more flexible so that I leave enough space for connection with other people and my higher power. I used to use this description of so when I create art, and I do not have my sketchbook here. Do I? I might have it here, but it wasn't a prop. It wasn't a prop that I needed. But when I create art with a ruler, even gosh, with a ruler, it's very, very different to free-handed art. And for some reason, I've always found more satisfaction in just trying freehand. I can draw quite straight lines with my hands, but they're not perfect. Um, and actually, it's really interesting for me to recognize that the version that's just me trying my best with what I have innately is actually the version that I seem most happy with afterwards. So the non-ruler version. It's okay if that doesn't apply. I also apply that to singing. So I sing at weddings and other events. And it's a privilege to be invited into other people's spaces. But in recovery, I get to just do my absolute best. But also, I get to recognize when I'm not well enough to do a thing. And I get to say, I apologize. And then I find a way of making reparation if it's an event that can be moved. Or I help to find a different performer, for example. But I don't have to kind of push through in all things, no matter what, at my detriment. Because my ego and my pride sometimes will want me to say, oh, yeah, I absolutely can still sing at that event, even if I'm not very well. And I'm not sure I'll be 100%, but I'll do my best. And actually, sometimes, just like in service, it's my responsibility to step aside and say, actually, I'm not the best person for this today. Can I help you find a different way that doesn't involve me in the same way right now? I haven't failed when I have to readjust my sails. There's no failure in admitting what the truth looks like for me today, but that doesn't absolve me of responsibility. And that brings me very neatly on to step 8 and looking at where I've caused harm. And a lot of my amends live in the living amends section. and they are to do with being more patient with the people that I love. I made sort of direct amends, not sort of, I did make direct amends with some individuals and just said, I'm really aware that over the however long time, I haven't been as patient or kind or loving or tolerant as I would have liked to have been. These are the fears that were really loud for me at the time. They were not your fault. They were mine. Not my fault either, but it was my stuff, and I'm sorry that it had a negative impact on you and my relationship with you. How can we move forward? And I get choked up purely because, weirdly enough, allowing myself to connect with other people in my vulnerability is strangely the most powerful thing in all of my relationships. It's more powerful than when I try and show up and be perfect and be everything that I think you want me to be. It's profoundly connecting when other people know that they can also come just as they are. Yeah. Yeah. And I also love that my internal script isn't like, oh my gosh, they must be thinking all of these things because you're crying and doing a chat. No, I don't even have that script anymore. And I'm not going to swear because I'm aware that it may offend people. But I quite frankly tell that internal voice that is not full of love to do one. There's another version that's more sweary, but to do one. If it's a voice that doesn't serve me and doesn't serve my ability to be present for others in a way that's loving, compassionate, and tolerant, then it's not helpful for me. And I want to also be clear, it's okay for me to experience anger still. I'm not unrecovered to experience anger or frustration or annoyance or impatience. I'm human. Oh, yeah, I'm human. And in recovery, I get to meet my humanness in a different way that doesn't require the same degree of self-destruction. Hopefully, it doesn't require any. Yeah. When it comes to doing my step 9, I hopefully refer to a sponsor and other trusted individuals and my higher power, and I check in with myself as to what types of amends look right for which people, who really needs to be on that list, and some people really don't need to be on that list. And it's one of the things that I use as an example that reminded me that my sponsors are just wonderfully, incredibly generous human beings, but they are human beings with their own experiences and they don't have all of the answers that are right for me. And I say that because I carry that as a sponsor too. I don't have all of the answers at all, not even a big percentage. I'm not going to number it. And one of my sponsors said that I needed to make amends to someone that was an abusive human in my life. The reason I use this example is because it took me a while to recognize. She said, if you don't do that, you won't find recovery. And when I looked at my actual harms, the only harms that I listed were simply, I don't think well of this person. I wish they weren't here. Not I would like to kill them. Forgive me if that language is triggering to anybody. Not that I would like to cause them any kind of harm, but I really wish they weren't here. Because I would feel safer in the world. I don't believe that I need to make amends to that individual because I have thought things. I think I'd be making amends for the rest of my life if I had to make amends for all of the kind of tricky thoughts I have. My first thought and all of my thoughts aren't always right or perfect, and they aren't always the ones that I need, but they are the ones that I have, and I get to make a choice as to what I do with them. I'm not a bad person for having complicated thoughts, but I have a choice today. You know, I get to ask myself, what next? Sorry, were you telling me I have 5 minutes left? No. Okay.
Right now you have 6 minutes at this point.
Thank you. Yeah, it's okay for me to have tricky thoughts still. I'm not bad. Actually, I find it much healthier to admit at times in a measured way when I am angry. I don't have to tell the person I'm angry with them. No, but I can name my anger in journaling or speaking to somebody else and say, I am angry. I don't even need to talk about who it's about. And the reason I say that is actually I realized that by wanting to be happy all of the time, or this perfect OA human, I was really stunting my ability to connect with what I had to offer myself in the world. I was becoming more and more disconnected from myself by acting as if to the extent that was damaging to me. Acting as if is wonderful, especially if it gets me to do the things that are right for me and that are responsible for me and are in line with my responsibilities to others in most cases. But acting as if, as in pretending that things do not impact me all of the time, is a form of toxic positivity that I do not subscribe to anymore because it's the thing that kept me ill. It's the thing that made me think I needed to restrict in response to having a really big feeling when I felt let down or rejected. And instead, thankfully, today, my response to feeling let down or rejected, sometimes once in a while when I'm very tired, can still be, oh, I can't possibly eat, whatever the next meal is. And actually, my immediate thought that is kind of a split second afterwards, or almost it kind of tails off into that thought, is simply, how can I meet myself with love? How can I best love myself? Is the next immediate thought. Um, yeah, I didn't always have that kind voice. I didn't. Step 10 allows me to look at what's working and what isn't, and not just at what isn't. What did I do well today? What positive things did I put into my recovery? It's not all about the red pen side of things. Um, and I can grow from recognizing what I did well as well, because I can see, these things worked better on these days and meant that I had less red things to write down or whatever color they need to be. Um, Step 11. Oh, I could talk about step 11 for days. It doesn't need to look like anybody else's. The reason I have chosen to go through the steps is it's important for me to recognize that my version of recovery was a version that I felt wasn't right for a really long time. I thought I wasn't doing some of these things well enough. Um, and with step 11, I thought, oh, but I don't love sitting in silence in the lotus position and emptying my brain of thoughts. Actually, what I do instead is I quite often, if I have a lot of energy, I'll do a full body shake, or I'll stretch, or I'll go for a little bit of power walk, and then I'll write, or I'll sing. But the main thing is that I do as many things as possible mindfully. I'm not thinking about my shopping list or my to-do list when I am choosing to be present with somebody else. I allow myself to just be where I am right now. And one thing I needed to do, I'm a human being that still can experience panic, is I ask myself, where are my feet? Where are my feet? And that reminds me to be present in this moment. My higher power is in the now. She's here. She'll also likely be with me in the future, and she likely was there in the past. But I can connect with her in the now, because in the now is where I am powerful enough to make the changes that I need to. Step 11 for me looks like drawing at times, listening to guided meditations, connecting with nature, looking at the intricacies on leaves and petals. I love cloud formations. I could talk to you about that forever too. It's working out that it doesn't need to look like anybody else, but working out what works for me today, and I can change it up as I need to. And if I don't know what it could look like, I can ask people and say, actually, how do you work this? And a really big part of my step 11 is just writing and writing and writing without censorship, without a need for necessary grammatical accuracy. It can have doodles in it if I need to, but sometimes connecting with my higher power is truly getting current with myself, and that helps me a lot. And step 12, everyone in this room is doing it already. I get to do it in different ways from the beginning, and I get to do as much or as little as is helpful to me and to the people around me. Again, I'd like to go back to the it's not my job to rescue anyone, and I can't do that anyway. Um, and I try not to assume that I know what you need to hear from me. I try my best to not assume that I have the answers for anybody else but myself. And I also try not to assume that I have all of the answers, because I
One
don't.
minute, 1 minute.
Thank you. Um, But carrying the message can look differently at different times, and that's okay. And if you're a human that's been in recovery for a really long time and you're not able to sponsor at the moment or have the capacity, you're not failing either. If you don't have capacity to give other types of service, you're not failing. For me, it's important to keep doing the best that I can. Wherever you are in your recovery, I'm going to say this to myself, take it as you will. You're welcome here. If you don't know how to get abstinent today, you're welcome here. If you don't know what language works for you in your recovery and you can't find a sponsor that quite sticks, and you struggle with outreach and you struggle with meetings and putting your camera on and being honest and writing the inventory or not writing the inventory, you are welcome here just as you are, insofar as you have a commitment to keep trying. It's okay. It helps me to say that out loud. I think I'm nearly at time. Thank you.
Fine, thank you.
Thank you so much, Natasha. And we will now open the Q&A section of our meeting, which will also be recorded. Please post your questions only in chat function. I will ask the question on your behalf. So you can go ahead and send them to me, and I will ask questions on your behalf. I know that was an amazing share. Thank you so much for that. Questions? Don't everybody jump in there at once. Help me out. I know, I get so enthralled that sometimes I forget what I want to ask. Oh, there we go. A couple of them coming in now. Natasha, what is the most surprising thing recovery made possible for you that you never thought was possible?
My overthinking. My overthinking stopped being thinking that was to do with the worst case scenario and instead went to the what could be possible for me. So rather than assuming it could be terrible or scary, being open to the alternatives.
Nice. Okay. What do you look for in a sponsor?
Me, I kind of interview a sponsor, I'm going to be honest, lovingly. But I look for someone who is both walking their talk and seems like they have a degree of freedom. So that might not be a specific type of body, it might not be a specific gender necessarily. It won't be a specific age or race or any of those things. So I generally look for someone who is consistent in how they behave and speak. It's a tricky one to ascertain if they're a new person to me, but I trust energy. Energy usually tells me a lot, and I ask questions. It's okay for me to ask questions as long as they're respectful. So I kind of ask a sponsor how they manage people in longer term recovery, because that's where I am. And I don't need them to have a path that looked like mine either. I very much trust energy and how are they working their program now? And are their expectations of me aligned with what I'm able to do today? And that's not the same as am I willing enough to be well? That might simply be the way that I can work my program doesn't align with their program today. Yeah.
Thank you, Natasha. Here's another one. Natasha, thank you so much for your gentle, kind-hearted, and accepting share. How has your relationship with your higher power changed since you came into recovery?
Oh, I came into recovery really angry with my higher power, and it then took me a while to recognize, and I've shared this before. It took me a while to recognize that I can't be angry at a thing I don't think exists. And so I used, my logical brain to help me. My relationship with my higher power has changed in that she doesn't need to look any particular way for it to be valid. for it to be a valid relationship with my higher power. I think the biggest thing is trusting that I'm held and that the universe has got me and that things will be okay, even if they don't feel okay enough right now. So it's simply trusting that I am taken care of. I think that's what's changed a lot. But it took a lot of trying. And I will say it took until about 7 years into my recovery to really refine a personal connection. And I have to say that because you're not doing it wrong if you haven't got it yet.
Thank you. All right, Natasha, thank you so much for your wonderful share. Can you tell us a bit more about your creative practice? Has recovery enabled you to become more creative?
Yes, recovery has. I believe that I sing in a more embodied way now. I'm not as constricted. I have promised myself, insofar as I am well enough, I will say yes to every single singing engagement that's asked of me. Reasonably, like if it's somewhere on the other side of the world, I've got to see if I have time to do it. In terms of creativity, I write a lot more. It can sometimes be really painful, but actually writing in a way that's honest and truthful is a lot more satisfying than writing in a way that I thought my writing voice needed to look. And the other part of my creativity for me is I draw a lot, and I don't judge anything I draw anymore. And I don't rip pages out if I don't like them. They can just stay where they are and I move to the next page. Um, and I don't care if other people don't understand what my sketchbook is about either anymore. I don't do it for them as in other people. I do create art for others, but my creative process as a whole is one that allows for flexibility for me to just be as I am, and that might not be aesthetically pleasing to others, but as long as it doesn't hurt anybody else, I don't apologize for it.
Wonderful. All right. What does your program look like on a daily or weekly basis?
So I usually start my morning with 1 to 3 guided meditations. I say it that way because it really depends on what I feel I need on any given day. And in all honesty, sometimes I don't always make the time for a guided meditation. It might be a moment of stillness when I look at the sunrise or the clouds outside or the changing light. Or when I have the window open, I just lay there and listen to the birds chirping away. And I allow myself to be still with myself as I am. So something meditative and reflective in some way. I usually journal for a while, and again, it depends on how much is weighing on me on any given day. And I often come back to journaling. So at lunchtime, I used to feel really dysregulated in the office. And so I often start my lunchtime with a bit of a brain dump. I call it a brain dump. But my morning writing always ends with I write the word positives and I in capitals and I put it in a rectangular box because it's a rectangular kind of word. I don't know if I can make it a square, I'm not going to lie to you. And then I put all of the people and the connections and the things that I can immediately resonate with as being hopeful and love filled to remind myself to start my day with here are all of my worries I'm handing over to my higher power. Please help me carry them today. Thank you very much. And I'll also do my part. And then here are all of the good things, and they're good things within me and in the world. What else do I do? I try and get to a meeting during the day if I can, and if not later in the day. I do my best to connect with at least 2 or 3 fellows during the day. It might be a voice note, it might be a message, it might be sharing a reading, but I try to have at least one honest connection. So, kind of really sharing where I'm at. And it doesn't have to be 8 hours long, it could be like 80 seconds long. And I also allow space to hear where someone else is in that day as well. And I normally close the day with some kind of meditation. Not always, I'm going to be honest, not always. I usually write my inventory after I've eaten, before I go to bed. And then if I need to share something from my inventory, I'll earmark it and share it briefly with somebody, and then expand on it later. That's usually my like daily thing. Within my week, I try and ensure there's space for creativity. And I try and make sure that I go to meetings that aren't just my familiar ones, so I can hear the message in voices that I haven't become kind of overly familiar to, like assuming that I know what people are going to say, for example. And I also ensure that when I attend meetings, I allow myself to be seen in the best way that I can. So, um, and that's okay if it's not comfortable for people to be on camera or whatever, that's okay. But for me in my program in recovery, I get to show up as I am, even if I feel a bit disheveled, with the recognition that I will be accepted and loved as I am. And that's an important part for me to keep showing up with. Um, it's a really important part of my program to show up honestly. I think I answered it mostly.
That was wonderful. Thank you, Natasha. Thanks for the great share. How do you bring your higher power into looking after your body?
Oh, I like this one. I liked all of them. I liked all of them, but this one completely transformed my relationship with my body. A sponsor, my second sponsor, she encouraged me to do an affirmation in my underwear in front of the mirror, and it was along the lines of, I look exactly how I'm supposed to look today. I weigh exactly what I'm supposed to weigh today. I am a child of God, and I loved myself. I love myself, not loved myself. And I would do that 3 times. And it used to make me cry. It used to make me sob. And I recognized that when I was on the metro, because I was in Paris when I first started in 12-step, when I was feeling really overwhelmed, I would have this voice of, I am a child of God and I love myself. And it was almost the version of bringing me to my knees, but it was so grounding. And it was only not upsetting, it was moving because it was a profound truth that for a really long time I'd forgotten, that I was a being that was lovable and capable of being loved and sharing love. And yeah, so affirmations in general really changed my relationship with my body. I was also encouraged to write 10 things about my body that I loved, physical things. They can't just be cerebral as much as our brains are beautiful parts of us. Um, and the notion was to kind of adorn them with love. And so I used to wear rings as a kid, and I didn't for a while, and then I did for a while. But to remind myself that my physical self is kind of the vessel that carries all of the other wonderful things that I connect with other people with. Like I give great hugs. They're not necessarily, that wasn't on the list, but I do give great hugs. I reckon my hair was on the list, my hands. They can be really things that we consider simple. But the main thing is for me was being open to having a different relationship with my body and recognizing that it didn't need my body to look a certain way in order for me to love my body right now.
Thank you, Natasha. Beautiful. How much contact do you have with the sponsor? Daily, weekly, monthly?
At the moment, I think it really depends on what's going on for me. So on days that feel a bit trickier, I might check in a few times, but they won't necessarily be live calls. They'll be like the odd voice note around something. Um, I usually try and have a longer call, maybe every week or every other week. And I want to caveat all of that with my my sponsor at the moment is not one human. My sponsorship model is multiple humans. Um, I'm honest with all of the humans. I don't choose to take things to one person so they'll give me an answer that I want, not at all. Um, but I remember early on in my recovery being reminded that different people will always bring different things to my recovery, and it's okay for me to share with different humans. So, but I suppose the answer is simply probably daily contact still with someone that knows the things that are dearest to me.
Great. Thank you. How do you overcome forming resentments that come from Assuming or imagining other people's bad intentions.
Hmm. So the concept of right-sizing things comes to mind. So sometimes I write what my imagined thoughts are, not my imagined thoughts, just my perception of the thing. And then I actually write from the other person's perspective. And it often allows me to connect with the other person's fear. And with the caveat that I'm still assuming I'm still assuming that I know what someone else thinks. But it allows me to create a degree of compassion for the other person where I can see them as a human being that has behaved in a way that isn't necessarily particularly helpful. But with that, armed with that information, I get to look at what do I want to do next with this information. So as much as some people can go in the category of they're a human being that was having a really hard time because of X, Y, and Z, I can also look at, but that behavior wasn't acceptable. It was still hurtful. It had this impact on me, the what next. And so by allowing myself to look at the thing for what it is rather than just my story of the thing, um, it helps me to move on from just being angry.
Great. What does compassion look like for you when experiencing big fears? And what are you grateful for about your fears?
Hmm. What does compassion look like? Oh, that was a long question. When experiencing big fears, can you ask me again, please?
Sure. What does compassion look like for you when you're experiencing big fears? And what are you grateful for about your fears?
Thank you. So compassion and gratitude for fears. Um,
Yes.
thank you. So a big thing for me is to um thank my body for alerting me about something rather than being annoyed or like fear is can be scary, but just saying thank you. What do you need from me? Um, quite often I'll have that it's okay voice. What else? I remind myself that no feeling lasts forever. No feeling lasts forever. Um, what else? Compassion also looks like telling myself, it depends on the situation, but some things actually I'm allowed to not do them. If it evokes such a profoundly negative impact for me, I'm allowed to question whether or not that thing is necessary, if it's necessary for me to do right now, if I can make it safer for myself. So quite often I find necklaces offer me comfort. They feel like a protective thing. When I'm going into a situation that provokes fear, but it's something that I kind of do need to do and is ultimately a loving thing for myself. Like I don't like getting certain types of medical tests done, for example. I will share it with a friend first. I will either wear or carry an object that reminds me of that connection to that love and that compassion that I can borrow from someone else and kind of feel like they're coming with me. The main thing is I talk to myself kindly and not as if I'm so stupid for this or that's ridiculous. I don't belittle myself in response to fear. It's a really valid feeling to have. Um, and as part of a course that I'm doing, don't worry, I won't name names and I won't stray too far away from what we talk about at all. It was really helpful for me I think it was a talk that I listened to, recognize that a lot of the time when I feel fear, I then attribute a story to it. And sometimes it helps me to just ask myself to recognize in myself, I'm feeling fear right now. I'm anxious because, and also to recognize that quite often the bodily feeling, my brain will then try to look at when have I felt this way before? And it will often look at, I felt this way when I last did an interview that didn't go particularly well because I was really tired, X, Y, and Z, and I felt, ugh. And so I have to remember that sometimes my fear will get my thinking hijacked to go to a place that doesn't necessarily serve my next right thing. So it's also allowing myself to not make big decisions in that space. Um, what am I grateful for in relation to my fears is they often tell me what's really important to me. So my fears will often come up when I'm scared of losing something or scared of not getting something that's important to me. I have a lot of fear around my coaching practice sometimes, I say sometimes. But it helps me to really tap into the fact that this is something that I really value. How can I allow myself to enjoy the process? Because sometimes my fear comes up because I'm scared I won't do a good enough job. For example, if I'm singing at a wedding, but actually I sometimes have to look at what's the feeling really, and I sometimes recognize that that anxiety exists because I want to do a good job and I don't want to let other people down. But that anxiety is just energy. So it's also, I'm grateful that fear allows me, it's an invitation to have a different type of conversation with myself. And it sometimes very much keeps me from doing things that could be really harmful for me. It alerts me when there is real danger as well. Um, yeah, hopefully that was helpful. It was waffly. Hopefully it was helpful.
Great, Natasha. Really quickly, and then we're going to wrap up with this one. I didn't get to all the questions. Thank you, everybody. They were amazing. You mentioned a difficult amend. What was your process in getting to your decision and what you could do with that amend? In just like 1 or 2 minutes, please.
Sure. So with that amend, I actually talked to a therapist about that amend. I wrote about it a lot. I checked in with myself, and I also checked in with what would be my real motives in making this particular amend that I thought I needed to make. And the only part of me that aligned with, I must absolutely make this amend, was a part of me that was subscribing to a form of moral perfectionism, i.e., everything has to be absolutely perfect and great, and I need to be seen as wonderful by everybody in all of the ways in order to be good enough almost. And the other part of me actually would have done the amend, but it would have been a form of self-harm. Making amends to someone that was abusive to me would have been a form of self-harm. And so I really had to recognize like all of the different layers that came into play and also I would have been making the amends to people please with my sponsor. And if a sponsor suggestion doesn't sit right with me and I am scared to challenge it in a way that's respectful and tolerant and all of those things, then I should probably be having a conversation as to how secure that relationship is with that sponsor, because I should be able to challenge in an appropriate way in a sponsorship relationship. So actually, I listened to my gut, and I also allowed the voices of other trusted people to kind of fortify me in my decision. And I also remembered, if it's an amend that I really need to make, it will come back up again when I'm doing inventory again. It will come back up again because it will continue to niggle at me. I have to trust the process, and I have to trust my process. Thank you.